I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Bill, hooray, jobs, jobs, jobs coming to New York City as well as the area around Alexandria, Virginia, and Nashville, Tennessee. Yes, it's Amazon's big announcement finally. After being pitched by some 200 cities around the country, Amazon announced that it will actually split its new headquarters between New York City and Alexandria, Virginia, and then it'll put an operations center with smaller numbers in Nashville, Tennessee. Bill, some 25,000 jobs coming to New York City and a huge facility there, some 25,000 jobs coming to Alexandria, as well as a smaller number of jobs coming to Nashville. And Bill, I guess what struck me about this was a story that I read that said that New York essentially paid $48,000 per job created to create these jobs. 25,000 jobs, $10 billion in tax revenue that New York expects to accrue over 20 years from this. And Amazon's investing $2.5 billion in the local economy. But Bill, cities across the country, including Dallas, threw themselves at the feet of Amazon, pleaded, begged, offered incentives and tax breaks and direct cash infusions to get this. Isn't it time, Bill, that conservatives just acknowledge that there is no such thing as a free market anymore, and that, in fact, playing these cities off each other is just another form of corporate greed where government is hand in hand with corporations to rip off the people?
Excellent. Scotty, to say that the free market's not in play here is just nuts. I mean, Jeff Bezos and Amazon are making a financial decision. I'm pretty sure they're not doing this out of just a deep love for Bill de Blasio. I got a feeling that there's an economic angle to the New York location that makes the deal worthwhile for them.
They said it was talent. They said the reason why they located in Alexandria and New York City was to be able to get the talent, and these are six-figure jobs apparently that they're talking about, and lots of them.
No, that seems a reasonable answer to me. One thing I do notice, though, is that there are no Amazon offices in California, and there's plenty of computer talent out here. So we have Jerry Brown to thank for that, and Gavin Newsom, no doubt, will continue that legacy and accelerate it into the future. Look, when you first told me the story, I didn't heard it before. I never hear these things before we shoot them. My first thought was New York City, and I really thought, why the hell would you be in New York City? Honestly, it just seems like an exceedingly difficult place to do business in, but I suppose that Amazon knows Amazon's business better than I do, and the numbers made sense on some level. But the idea that this is not a market-driven decision is just wrong. They didn't use legislation. They didn't legislate themselves into New York City. They didn't. It's true they're offering up taxpayer money, which is taken at gunpoint, but that's government. That's not business's problem.
Well, this is how it happens, though, Bill. As you know, I served for a very short time in county government. And a lot of the money from these counties and states actually gets funneled through the federal government. And so we're taking that money at the county or state level, and we're using that as an inducement to get some jobs in our county, for example, that are not going to go to some other county. And so essentially we're playing taxpayers against each other. We're using your money, in this case, your money from California, to lure somebody to New York City or to Alexandria, Virginia. And as you pointed out, you don't get one of those headquarters in California. Do you really want your government to be in the business, whether it's local, state, or federal government, in the business of picking and choosing winners and losers here and using your money as the negotiating tool?
Well, the governments, in the form of the city governments in this case, are using the market as well. I mean, New York wouldn't have made the offer if New York didn't think they were going to get more money out of it in the long term than what they're paying to get the location there. They're banking on the fact that having Amazon office in New York City will eventually produce many more dollars in terms of revenue than would have been the case if they hadn't launched this gigantic, luminous piece of bait out there. And so both parties are making rational decisions based on their self-interest. Bezos thinks that it's worthwhile, given the tax breaks or the cash that he's been given, that the location in New York makes sense, and the city of New York is reasoning from a market point of view that this money could be considered an investment, because in the long run they're not doing it as a philanthropy move. They're doing it because they suspect that having any number of thousands of six-figure employees being paid in Manhattan will eventually pay New York City more than what it costs. So I don't think either party here is doing anything either unethical or unreasonable. I'm surprised that New York made the cut, considering how difficult things are there. And there may have been a publicity angle to this that I'm maybe not considering. And look, Scotty, I don't run Bezos, a company. There may be a distribution hub necessity that may be such a high population density area that requires some kind of a corporate presence in the Northeast. Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, and that kind of thing. So I don't know what the numbers are on their side, but I don't see anything wrong on either side of this. I just find that. That I think the smartest, you really can make a very good case for Federal Express being just such a remarkable company in so many ways, and just really having the first, at least in my mind, the first really outside of the box kind of, paradigm shattering idea, certainly since I've been alive. And I think they chose to be, their hub is Memphis, isn't it? I think it's Memphis.
Yeah, well, and in this case, I mean, Nashville is a distribution center, but the other two are corporate offices. They're headquarters offices.
Okay, but I'm talking about FedEx in this particular case.
And Bill, let me just say that in this case, let's talk about Alexandria, for example.
Well, hang on. Hey, let me just make my point about Memphis. You would say, Memphis, you're going to launch this gigantic enterprise in Memphis? Why on earth would you do that? Well, as it turns out, aside from the fact that if you look at the hubs and you look at the distribution network, Memphis is pretty well located. If you weight the distribution problem not by area but by population, Memphis is pretty much near the center of where you want to be. But much more importantly than that, Memphis was just Memphis. Now now Memphis is the headquarters of Federal Express. And so when you come into a neighborhood like that, you get a reaction not just from the city government. You get a reaction from the workers, you get a reaction from the community, from everybody. They tend to step up to these kind of things. I remember when the Saturn plant went in Tennessee someplace, I remember just hearing reports of how everybody was basically stepping up. I'm sorry to see that brand go. But I don't see how that happens in New York City. And so therefore, while the other two branches make a kind of sense, Alexandria, Virginia is not exactly the cheapest real estate in the world, Scott.
Well, and that's exactly my point about Alexandria, is Alexandria has grown fat off the largesse of the federal government. And aren't we just, by allowing them to engage in a competitive bidding process with taxpayer dollars in this situation, aren't we taking the unfairness that was created by the federal government and screwing people in smaller communities around the country? Shouldn't the federal government basically say, hey, look, Alexandria, the reason why you're so hot is because of us. Now, we demand that you be more equitable so that the income inequality that has run rampant in this country will not be exacerbated using government taxpayer money.
So you're saying that I should be in favor of the government legally mandating the equitable distribution of wealth? Is that what you're saying I should be?
I don't say anything, Bill. I ask questions.
That's exactly that's the question you asked. And look, Scott, you said that these governments are betting with taxpayer money, but that's not an accurate way of putting it, because if you lose a bet, you lose the money, right? I mean, if I bet $100 on the Gators and some other team from some other place in Florida, let's say, wins that game, I'm out $100. But if I make an offer to somebody and I offer $100 and the offer's turned down, I haven't lost the money.
No, I'm talking about the people who actually win the bet. So
doesn't matter.
That's still a bet.
Matter.
If Alexandria wins this, because Amazon, 10 years from now, when all the tax incentives fade away, Amazon could waltz out of there and go to Tallahassee.
Watch it now. They could, but the question is, will they? And to say it is clearly not a bet, Scott. If you and I and everybody else are competing to put an offer on the table, and if we don't lose the money in the event of it being taken by somebody else, it's not a bet, it's an offer. So if I want to risk Alexandria $10 billion in an offer, and I happen to think that the math works for Alexandria, and I put $10 billion in taxpayer money to try to get Amazon here so I get $20 billion in revenues, I haven't squandered the taxpayers' money because I haven't lost it in the event that the bid is turned down. I'm actually trying to do as much good as I can with the money from a financial point of view. Now, look, let me just say this now. All of these arguments that I'm making are making sense if governments were sensible, frugal, practical operations that had respect for their revenue source. And that's certainly not the case. And I'm not trying to make that the case. But since you talk about a specific issue here, I think it's pretty clear that these are both market decisions on both sides, and both sides seem to find it equitable or advantageous, which is why they voluntarily agreed to the deal, and that's kind of what I'm all about.
Well, Bill, I can't believe that there's not a scintilla of compassion as a conservative on your part for...
as a conservative, I have no compassion for anyone or anything.
Because...
I hope they all starve to death, whoever you're talking about.
Specifically in this situation, Alexandria, Virginia, to a lesser extent New York City, are what they are, and they're as desirable as they are because of the presence of large concentrations of government, largely run by Democrats, who have made them fat over the years, and now they can use that fat in order to lure these companies to their locales.
It's kind of a fatuous argument, Scott.
Thank you.
What that infers is there's some master plan on the part of a political party to strengthen this particular neighborhood in order to reap the benefits of the revenue that comes afterwards. I'm not saying there's not some degree of that happening, but the world is far more complex than that. You don't get to plan on that level, certainly not with people with government minds. So what I suspect has happened is, when the solar system was created, there's this gigantic dust cloud. And just through random irregularities, some parts of that cloud were a little bit denser than others. And because they're a little bit denser, they're able to pull in a little bit more matter. And as they pull in more matter and become ever more dense, their gravitational field increases until finally you find that you've got formerly 9 and now 8 planets, which are microscopic, by the way, compared to the size of the solar system. But once was a more or less equitable distribution of dust in a plane on the solar system is now concentrated into these 8 planets. And this is a natural process, and I don't see anything particularly wrong with it. The only time I think something like that is wrong and needs to be dealt with is when they are using legislation or other means of enforcement or coercion to interfere with people's ability to make a fair play in the market. So if you're telling me that there's legislation that favors one location or another, that's something else. I remember when Boeing, Seattle and Boeing were the same thing. They were the same words, Boeing Field in Seattle, you can't take Boeing out of Seattle. Well, turns out you can. And the reason you can is because in Washington State, you can come up with the political clout, Democratic Party political clout, to empower the unions to the point where Boeing, and I got to tell you, Scotty, of all the companies that have to pack up and move, kind of box things up in the U-Haul and drive across country, I reckon Boeing's got probably the toughest job of any company I can think of, because those planes are actually pretty big. And the Boeing facility in Seattle, I think, was the largest
Now, they built a new facility in North Carolina,
correct,
South Carolina, but they didn't shut
correct.
down Seattle.
Okay, well, they left, though, and they didn't shut it down, but they left. And they went to South Carolina because South Carolina is a right-to-work state. And the entire phrase right-to-work state is an indication of just how bad things have gotten in this country. The whole country should be a right-to-work state. The whole world should be a right-to-work zone. But what happened was the unions use legislation to force Boeing to make the decision to move out of Seattle, which has got to have cost them tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's big pain. But they decided that the pain of staying in Seattle, in terms of what the government of Washington State was doing to them, they decided, my God, we're going to have to pack up every single Boeing jumbo jet we have. It's going to take a lot of plastic peanuts. We're going to need a lot of wrapping tape. We're going to have to ship these things all the way across the country to South Carolina. This is going to cost us a fortune, but we'd better do it now, because if we don't, then this legally mandated strangulation is going to kill us. And this is where I have an enormous problem with governments. But if you're saying that, hey, Seattle put money on the table for Boeing, and South Carolina put more money on the table for Boeing, and Boeing decided to go to South Carolina, then that's a win for South Carolina's negotiating team. Boeing must think it's a win if they're going to go, and Seattle should have made a better offer.
Behind every news story you read, there are ideas, and behind those ideas, principles. And those principles are what we have these conversations about 5 days a week, thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com, who make it possible through their contributions of $9.95 a month for us to not only have this conversation, but then to distribute it around the world. We're grateful to them, and we plan to bring you much more of this. So keep one eye on the news and another at BillWhittle.com, where you will find the commentary that not only reinforces your ideas, but challenges your ideas. And I hope that inspires us all to think a little more. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.